In today's travelogue, we will see different attractions in Havana, as well as take a short trip down to the southern coast to see the history of the Bay of Pigs, including its marvelous beaches and scuba diving. Derek, thank you for being with us today and presenting on Cuba.
All right, thank you. Can you hear me all right and see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right, I'll take it away. So, traveled to Cuba in July 2023, which is just over a year ago, of course. So most everything I should be saying today is still applicable, but as you know, there's a little bit of a rocky uh, diplomatic history between the U.S. and Cuba. So the requirements for entry, at least on the U.S. Side of things, tend to be in flux. But I double checked before I put together this presentation, and I believe everything that I experienced last year holds true today. But if you're watching this on YouTube in the future, you might want to, double check things just to make sure everything that I'm going through remains accurate. With that said, we can get into it. I'm going to spend a greater amount of time than normal on sort of the logistics and the visa situation and just the things you need to do to prep to come to Cuba. It is a little more complicated than just, heading down to Mexico. But, I did it and it was not insurmountable. So you can do it too. The lodging situation in Cuba is also unique, at least for U.S. passport holders. And then in terms of the itinerary, I visited Havana, Playa Giron, and Playa Larga. And then I always have a food section because that's one of the best parts of traveling. And of course, I will be very transparent about the costs, just so you know what you'd potentially be getting yourselves into if you were to do a similar trip. And I mentioned I was here in July 2023. It was also just a long weekend. I think we left Chicago Thursday morning and we came back Sunday afternoon, something like that. So everything you're about to see took place over the course of about 4 days. All right, we all have a good map. I'm sure most people here know where Cuba is, but just to sort of triangulate it, you can see Miami up at the top middle, so it's a straight shot down from Florida. And then Cancun over there. And then I'm not going to talk too much about the history, but it's obviously an inevitability with Cuba. So just a fun fact about it, I suppose. Cancun, the ground was broken in Cancun as a tourist destination as a result of Havana sort of being taken away from the U.S. tourist class because Havana used to be the Cancun of the Caribbean, and now Cancun is the Cancun. So that's the origin of Cancun as a sort of party tropical destination lies in the fact that Havana is not anymore. All right. So zooming in a bit here, started out, obviously flew into Havana, and then I'll get into this in more detail, but we ended up taking a shared taxi down to Playa Giron. That took about 2.5, 3 hours. And then we backtracked a bit to Playa Larga for a day. And then from Playa Larga, we took a public bus back to Havana, which took 3+ hours. There was a couple stops along the way. And then focus your eyes real quick on the inlet of water between Playa Giron and Playa Larga. That is the Bay of Pigs, which is very, very famous. I'll get into a couple of things about that as we go along, but just to point out where Playa Giron is versus Playa Larga, because you'll see some pictures of the beaches and the waters. Playa Giron is firmly on the Caribbean coast, and then Playa Larga is in that bay. So they are very, very different beach destinations based on the way that currents work and everything. We'll get into that as we go along. So logistics, I bought tickets originally on United several months in advance, which had me routing through Houston. Quite literally 24 hours before I was meant to go, United sent me a notification that my flight had been canceled, and they didn't explain why. So I thought the trip was off, but I just looked up. And they didn't offer any, alternatives. There just wasn't another flight that day. I think they had one daily flight to Havana, and it was gone. So, I was ready to to, unpack and say forget it, but I looked up other potential flights for the exact same days, and wouldn't you know it, American Airlines had one through Miami, and it was actually $20 cheaper than what I paid on United several months prior. So I got the full refund from United and ended up saving 20 bucks, and it was the same times a day and everything. So that worked out. As I mentioned, took a shared taxi from Havana to Playa Girón. This was organized through my Airbnb host, and I'm going to be talking about that in greater detail as well. But basically, a lot of logistical questions can be handled by your Airbnb host. And I'll get into the Airbnb aspect as well. But that is actually also part of their jobs. It's not necessarily like an Airbnb in another country where all you get is an access code and a big scolding note to clean up after yourselves. In Cuba, Airbnb is set up so it's almost like a homestay where the family or individuals who own the property that you're staying on can be considered a resource to you in figuring anything out. And we stayed in 3 different Airbnbs, and everyone was extremely kind and helpful, and we never had a problem that they didn't have an answer to. So that was nice to have, and it's good to know. And then yeah, public bus back to Havana from Playa Larga, and that was easy. You just wait on the side of the street. The buses are on schedule. Sometimes they're a little late, but it is what it is. They they reliably come. So the bus system in Cuba the network is extensive, so that is a very cheap option as well. So like I said, it's a little difficult, or not difficult, but complex to travel into Cuba as an American or as a U.S. passport holder. I'll say too that these are restrictions that are put in place by the United States. It's not Cuba who's saying you need to jump through all these hoops. It is the United States. I think that's just important to know when you're sort of thinking about these things. But it's pretty easy at the end of the day. You can buy your plane ticket confidently. Like I said, I bought my plane ticket technically the day before I left, and there was no, American didn't have some sort of big warning sign on the screen. You do need a visa, and it costs roughly $85. You can see in parentheses here, I say depending on method. Now you can purchase that visa in advance to be mailed to your house, which is what I did, in which case you incur something like a $15 delivery fee because the only option is to like two day express, even though I purchased it well in advance. You can also buy it in person at the kiosk before you board your flight. American had that going. The only reason I didn't do that or I didn't go that route is because I just wanted to, have all my T's crossed and my I's dotted, and I had the thing in hand well before I left instead of getting to the airport and then, potentially risking some complicated situation. Now, technically, and again, this is a US restriction. Technically, you're not allowed to go as a tourist. You're not allowed to engage in tourism in Cuba. Ostensibly the reason for this is because the Cuban government owns the means of production. It means it owns all the enterprises, which means basically theoretically all the money you're spending is going towards the state to divvy back out to the people as they see fit. And the U.S. doesn't like that because it's supporting the state of Cuba, which the U.S. government does not like. So what you're going for there, you get a number of options from journalism to education to whatever. The main one that you want to click or check on the thing is support for the Cuban people. Now this does actually have a meaning, and I mentioned earlier that Airbnb exists. So how can Airbnb exist if the Cuban state doesn't own Airbnb? Well, as a result of a lot of the embargo, basically, the Cuban government has had to sort of open up private enterprise so that people can have additional means of making a living. And one of those that they've allowed, in response to their tourism being a major clutch of the economy, is Airbnb. So folks who own property can, set up an Airbnb situation. And because it's a U.S. corporation, the United States and actually actively encourages you to use Airbnbs. You're technically not allowed to stay at any state-run hotel or anything like that. So you have to use Airbnb as per the letter of the law. And the way that this is support for the Cuban people in terms of what the United States' mentality is you are putting money into the pockets of the individual people rather than the state. So you're not lying. It's not a lie. You are supporting the Cuban people as far as the U.S. government is concerned. So you're not fibbing and at risk of coming back and getting handcuffed or something. Okay. One resource that I double checked the other day that remains true is this Choose to Explore. So they've got a really good breakdown of all the stuff you need to do. I don't know why I put it in this bullet point. It should have been the last thing. But everything that I'm talking about right now, if you go on YouTube and you type in Choose to Explore Cuba, this was the video I used to make sure that all my lists was checked before I left. So that was created just a few months before I went, and it was accurate, and it remains accurate today as of September 2024. Okay, so into the actual difficult stuff. Your US issued credit and debit cards will not work, so you will need to bring cash. This is actually to me, the most stressful thing because I hate using cash. I hate carrying it. I'm just always worried I'm gonna like drop it somewhere. And I like my credit card. So this was the thing that stressed me out the most, bringing cash and then getting an exchange is easy, but just knowing I had a bunch of cash in my backpack stressed me out a bit. So bring more than you think you're going to need for your trip, of course, because if you lose all that cash, it's going to pose a little bit of a problem. They do have basically like a Western Union situation, so it's not the end of the world if for some reason all your cash disappears, and you need to phone home. There are means to do that, but it's just better to bring all the cash you need up front, and not have to worry about doing any of that stuff. I guess this is a good juncture to talk about crime because I sort of alluded to like losing cash, which could be interpreted as cash getting stolen. Um, Cuba is a very, very safe place in terms of violent crime. Like I was walking around all over the place at night, I was walking down dark streets, what have you, and never felt in danger. I don't think that's a real problem there. But I did talk to another tourist that was on my trip, and he said that he did get some cash stolen from his backpack when he left it in the back of a taxi and went into the bathroom at a gas station or something. He came back and some of his cash was gone. So there are like pickpockety situations to be aware of, as there are anywhere else in the world. It just makes it a little more stressful because of the cash situation. Just be mindful of that. I didn't get any cash stolen from me, uh, and it was, as far as I ever perceived, never even close to a risk for me personally. Um, okay, so money exchange is super easy. There's two ways to do it. You can do it when you get to the airport or any currency exchange in the city of Havana. That's not the advisable way to do it because the official rate is about a third less powerful than the quote unquote black market rate. And uh, black market basically means when you get to your Airbnb, you're going to be let in by your lovely host and they're going to say, do you need me to exchange cash for you? And you say, yes, please. And you give them $200 or whatever, and then they're back in 20 minutes with the equivalent in pesos, but the street value, which is about 160 to 1. Uh, that's it, easy. And then I exchanged not all my cash, of course, but I think I did 2 or 3 exchanges over the course of the 4 days I was there, just because I erred on the side of caution. I didn't want to end up with a bunch of pesos, bringing back home and worrying about what to do with them. And then lastly, US cell phones don't work. You won't get a signal there. So uh, it's easy though. You purchase a SIM in advance online on this suenacuba.com website. It's $35. And then when you land at the Havana airport, you get out of the plane, you get your bags if you checked them, and then there's a big Sueña Cuba kiosk. And you walk up and your name's on a list and they cross it out and then they stick a SIM card in your phone. when I have an Android and I have a physical SIM card, I have to imagine there's eSIMs for iPhone users. That's something that I didn't have to worry about though, but I got to imagine that's not a problem. But anyway, that was also easy as can be. Just make sure your cell phone's unlocked and you're good to go. And I got a signal almost the entire time I was in Cuba, on the road when we were in very rural areas in between Havana and the Bay of Pigs. I didn't have much of a signal, but in on the beaches and especially in Havana, it was signals. Okay, now we can start looking at pretty pictures. Havana, very lovely city. If you watch like Anthony Bourdain or what have you, these sorts of shows, they always say like Havana's very chaotic and crazy city and all this stuff. I didn't think it was. I've been to quite a few places in Latin America, and I thought it was pretty middle of the road in those terms. The traffic was pleasant. Nobody drove like crazy. There wasn't a ton of honking. There wasn't like folks in the, I mean, there were folks in the streets, but like it was just like a normal, living city. I thought it was really pleasant. Obviously, a lot of the infrastructure is a bit, mm, what's a nice euphemism? I don't know, dilapidated. Again, sort of as a result of the embargo and the inability for them to get modern, tools and so on. But it is what it is. And there's all kinds of modern stuff around restaurants, bars, what have you. So with a few minor differences, it's basically like any Latin city. um and the people are really nice. Okay, so another map. So this was my big list of stuff I wanted to do. The yellow ones that are circled were my two different Airbnbs. So I spent the first night in Havana and then the last night, I think. And I wanted to do two different neighborhoods. So I did. So I did first this neighborhood to the left here, because I had a few places I really wanted to go, including this art gallery place, which is the other red green circle to the left. I wanted to be in walking distance of that. And then on the other side, that's Old Havana, which is sort of the classic place to stay as a tourist. Um, the neighborhood I stayed at on the first night to the left is called Vedado. And it was really nice. It was very neighborhoody, walkable, and so on. It was just a long distance from all the more touristy, historic stuff in Old Havana. So I wanted to get a taste of both places. This was my Airbnb on the first night. It's a loft style, so the bed is up there, up those stairs, and then I'm standing with sort of my back to the wall. It's bigger than it looks in this photo. This photo actually makes it look really small, but it was, there's a full-size couch to the right. There was a coffee table to my left that's just out of frame, and then a little hallway, and then the bathroom, right there in the center. I'll get into I wrote down the price in the last slide, but this is something like 25 bucks a night, maybe 30. So super duper affordable. And like I said, the host is around, 24/7, basically. So it comes with all the amenities you need. I already talked about sort of the process of the currency exchange, but one of the funny things about it is you get a lot of cash because you're dealing in all cash, and the exchange rate is 160 to 1. And I think I don't remember what the biggest bill was, but you see how much cash I was dealing with. Um, yeah, so just be prepared to carry around big wads of cash. So the first thing we did, this was something that was right by our first Airbnb, and we landed pretty early. We got to Airbnb in the early afternoon, and this was right down the street. So we said, hey, let's go. This is the sort of Fidel Castro History Museum, basically. So Castro semi-famously didn't allow his likeness to be utilized for like what is basically like propagandistic purposes, right? You won't see big murals of him or statues of him. I don't even think he's on the money, stuff like that. He was just sort of against that cult of personality, despite, the what we're told here, I guess, or what our perception might be. But whoever got it done got this pretty modest museum dedicated to him opened in the last like couple years, I think. So it's brand new. You have to go with a guide. It's free. You walk in. They basically ask, how much time do you have? We can customize this tour to be anything from half an hour to the full like 2 hour tour. And we said, hey, we got 2 hours. So we did the whole thing. It was a pretty nice modern museum. Um, Another thing we did on our first day, actually, this picture on the left, we did before the museum because the museum wasn't quite open yet. We got a mojito, which is obviously like sort of the national drink here, and I must have drank 400 of these over the course of the 4 days, and they were all each one was better than the last. The Cuban rum is good. The mint is fresh. The sugar is fresh. That's another thing Cuba's known for. So, hey, go figure. They make a good mojito. Um, and then this one on the right here is at the Ernest Hemingway bar, El Floridita, which is famous for being where Ernest Hemingway hung out. There's a little statue of him at the bar, sitting at the bar, and then they got live music, and the musicians work for tips, and the drinks come out fast, and it's a pretty nice place. So I do recommend it. This is in Old Havana. So actually, coincidentally, we stayed in Vedado on the first night, but at that Castro Museum, we met these couple of girls. They were from Indonesia, one of whom worked for the Indonesian consulate in Havana, and then the other one was her friend who was happened to be visiting. And they were excited to just hang out, and she offered to sort of drive us around to some of the touristy sites that she recommended. So we just did a little like Havana road trip with the two Indonesian women who were super nice and chill. And this is one of the places we went. I was sort of saving this for the last day. Like I said, we had the old Havana Airbnb, but we wound up there by happenstance. It was great. So another, I guess another thing to think about is there is a stark divide in the cost of food in Havana in the restaurants. So a lot of the restaurants that are geared towards tourists are expensive by my standards. This was the first place we went out to eat, and it was about $30 a person. Which, it's not crazy for like if you're in Chicago, but you're thinking, I'm in Latin America, things are going to be cheap. That's not necessarily true in Havana. If you're going towards one of these like tourist geared restaurants, they do up the price. That being said, the food is really good. I think Cuba has a reputation for having bad food. In my experience, almost all of it was very good, with some exceptions, which we'll get into. This place we went was upstairs from the Fabrica de Artes Cuba, the FAC, which was the sort of the main number one thing I wanted to do when we were in Havana. It used to be a factory, and they basically they turned it into an art gallery, and it's a maze. You walk in, what happens is you get a card, and whenever you get a drink or food or anything, the person who serves you marks the card, and then you pay on your way out. So you just walk in with this card, and they've got drinks and little like food stalls and stuff all over the place. And you wander around this factory, and from room to room, it's a completely different theme. So there's this art gallery you can see here. We kept walking down the hallway, and then there was a dance troupe, and then there was another room with dance lessons going on that you could just join. And then we walked into another room, and there was a full-on symphony playing Beethoven, and just people sitting down. And you can walk in, and there's a bar in the back. It was incredible. I would put it in one of the top experiences I've ever had in my life. Just walking around this place, and like, my God, the stuff you would see walking over the corner that you would never expect. Just this cool, awesome, like celebration of culture, music and dance and art and everything. And you don't know what's going to happen next. It was great. I highly, highly recommend this if you go to Havana. Okay, so that was day one. It was a short-lived Havana stint, and in the beginning, we went straight down to the Bay of Pigs. The main reason we went here was the scuba diving. It's supposed to be some of the best uh, scuba diving in the Caribbean. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but it is pretty darn good. And I guess it's some of the easiest diving you can do. The water is very warm, perhaps too warm. I don't know what that signifies, but and there's no current, and it's the perfect like Caribbean tropical uh, uh, coral gardens and coral walls and fish. So it's exactly what you'd picture. I didn't have a GoPro at the time. I was in between GoPros, so unfortunately I don't have any underwater pictures. But I'll expand on a little bit about the diving in a moment. This is the main beach. We stayed at an Airbnb in the town, which is about a 10-minute walk back from the beach. So once you get to this beach, I think we were here on a Friday, and it was pretty empty on Friday. The next day, there was a ton of local tourists that all drove in from, different parts, within a couple hours up and down the coast. But it is a tourist destination and a very, very pretty beach. And then oh, here's the beach. Uh, so you can see it's a pretty clean beach. There's some debris, but that happens. The reef you see here, you see where the waves are breaking. This is literally the beach that the CIA sponsored mercenaries attempted to land on when their aim was to overthrow the government, I guess. But uh, somebody, some bozo, misread a aerial, and they thought it was seagrass. So they had the mission was for the boats to just like speed up to the beach, land, and for the mercenaries to jump out. But it wasn't seagrass; it was a reef, and the boats all started sink. They crashed into it and started sinking, and that's what sort of allowed the Cubans to get the upper hand. So that's a little bit of that history here, but this is literally that beach. And then you can hang out here all day. There's about 10 of these different shacks. Each has a different specialty, from pizza to grilled fish to mojitos and so on. And the food is very cheap here, and the food was very good here. And I think I have a couple pictures later in the food section. But a mojito here was like $2, the equivalent of $2, and the grilled fish was like $5 with rice and a couple accoutrements. You get a whole fish or a whole lobster or what have you. So you can spend all day here and laze the day away and not break the bank with a beautiful view. Oh, here's a couple more mojitos. These were probably numbers 80 and 81. And there's other international tourists too on the beach. We were hanging out with a Portuguese couple at one time. We met an woman from Australia. So it wasn't just local travelers. So if you're worried about sort of, I guess, feeling out of place, there is a sort of international presence. Okay, so the scuba diving, this too is just basically the logistics of it were handled by our Airbnb host. We got there. I had messaged them, in advance, and I said, hey, we want to go diving for 2 days. And they said, no problem. When you get here, we'll set it up. And sure enough, when we got there, I said, hey, we want to go diving the next 2 days. And they texted the diving guy, and he picked us up the next morning at 8 a.m. And we drove about 15 minutes down. It's all shore diving here, which typically and especially here means it's cheap. It was $25 a dive, and we did 2 dives a day. And this is your transportation. He picked us up in our Airbnb in this car. We stopped for another couple and drove on down, and we had all the gear here, and we put it on and we walked into the water, and that was the scuba diving. Doesn't get any simpler than that. Okay, also here in Playa Huron is the museum dedicated to the Bay of Pigs situation. So there's a bunch of military themed stuff. These are all the Cuban casualties of the operation. I think it took place over the course of several days. And there was a number of folks who didn't make it, and they're memorialized here. And then there's a film you can watch in the back. It's very old school, sort of quote unquote propaganda style, like newsreel film. So if you ever wind up here, when you're checking in at the museum and they ask if you want to watch the movie, I say definitely go for it, because it's an experience. And then this is the sign leading into town, which it says Huron, the first great defeat of Yankee imperialism in Latin America. We're very proud of the counter military operation here. All right, we're halfway through, so I got to mosey on. Okay, so Playa Larga, we just wanted to mix it up a bit. Playa Larga, as you can see, the beach isn't quite as beautiful. I referenced this earlier where it's in the very back of the bay, so the water is murkier and the beach isn't quite as nice. The town itself is totally nice. It's a small town, it attracts a tourist. You can eat and drink on the beach, and there's some good food. Um, the thing you want to be cognizant of, though, is this town in particular is built right next to a swamp, and it's a protected swamp, so it's not going anywhere. Um, I part of the reason I wanted to stay here was to go birding early on our last morning. We spent one night here, so I wanted to go birding early on that second morning before heading to Havana. But I went out into the backyard and the mosquitoes were just so overwhelming that I decided not to, because our Airbnb host even said, when you go birding, it's in the swamp and you're going to see some beautiful birds, but the mosquitoes, if you're having trouble with this, they're going to be about 10 times as bad out there. And I just called it. And I'm mosquitoes don't like me. I don't typically notice mosquitoes, even when other people are noticing them. So they are bad. Um, so yeah, your mileage may vary with Playa Larga, but it's a nice place to stop. In terms of history, there were some of the battles of the Bay of Pigs situation happened here as well. So they do have a little bit of a memorialization effort here, just to sort of remember that. And as you can see. Okay, and then back to Havana. We stayed in Old Havana this time, which is this picture on the left. This is the very historic Havana with the government buildings and some the seaport and museums. I think I have a picture of it, a museum dedicated to the revolution. Here on the right is me and Simon Bolivar, who is sort of the liberator of a good chunk of South America. Um, he is appreciated here. This is the Granma, which is the yacht that Fidel and Che and Cienfuegos and that whole cohort actually sailed from Mexico and landed on the southern coast of Cuba near the Sierra Nevada mountains when they initiated the armed phase of the revolution. So this is literally that boat. It's on display here. I'm trying to remember. I think the actual museum was actually closed when I was there, so I couldn't go in. But I did hear it was relatively small, but obviously an area of interest if you're interested. Okay, I think we're nearing the end here. This is a friend of mine who lives in Havana. We just got to link up with her, and we met her at a brewery that's in an old, like, not abandoned, but used to be a factory for, who knows. But now it's a brewery, and it's right on the port there. So it's a really cool place to sit back. They also have food there too. I don't remember the name of it offhand, but if somebody wants to know it, throw the questions in the chat. Speaking of which, throw questions in the Q&A if you want. There's only one right now. All right, food. So obviously a ton of seafood on that southern coast there. This is a big plate full of fish and lobster and crab, uh, vegetables, rice, and so on. And there's another spent mojito in the back, or maybe that was a rum and coke actually. This was just a local restaurant, so it was relatively cheap. Probably about $5 or $8 for this big plate of lobster. This was on Playa Huron Beach, one of those shacks I had a picture of earlier. This is lobster and crab rice, and then like a homemade sort of hot sauce there in the middle there. Another another spent mojito, and this was like $6 or something. I did have a couple pizzas in Cuba. Unfortunately, none of them were great. But this one's at least pretty, so I chose this picture. This one was in Old Havana in sort of a tourist marketed restaurant with a bunch of kooky stuff all over the walls. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this specific restaurant, but it hit the spot after a long day of walking around. So there are worse things. This was a big old pork chop I got in another one of the expensive-ish tourist restaurants, and this was probably the best single meal of the trip, maybe besides like the grilled fish on the coast. This thing was expensive for what you get. It was like $25 or something, but it was delightful. So Again, I can find out the name of this restaurant. I don't remember it offhand, but I can look in the map and trace it back if somebody really wants to know. All right, last section is costs. Airfare from Chicago is about 500 bucks. I remember it used to be cheaper before COVID. Maybe it'll become cheaper again. We can all cross our fingers on that. They used to be like 300, 400. Now it averages 550 with that layover. I don't think there's a direct flight from O'Hare. The taxi from the airport is $25. We did the exchange with our Airbnb host and then paid the taxi after he dropped us off. Easy. The shared taxi to Playa Huron was $35 a person, and we got in the taxi. We were the only ones, and then the driver picked up two other people. So it was four people comfortably sitting in a five-seater, or five people with the driver. But it was a packed car, but we were fine. Hotel, like I said, the Airbnb, it's actually Airbnbs in Havana. It's 35 bucks. Actually, it was my birthday. So we sprung for a little bit of a fancier one in a high rise in Old Havana, and that was 60. And that had a nice view and in a big like deck terrace and stuff. And then in down on the southern coast, the Airbnbs are 25, 30 bucks. I've talked a few times about how much food ranges in price. Mojitos were $2 or $3, and like I said, the scuba diving was $25 a dive, which I think is the cheapest scuba diving I've ever done anywhere. And it was great, and I highly recommend it, despite the difficulties in the logistics. And that's the end of the presentation. So yeah, typically here, Christine, you can solicit questions from people who want to go off mute, or you can read questions in the Q&A, however we want to handle it.
Sure. Well, Derek, thank you so much for being with us today and presenting on Cuba. While we're waiting for more questions in the Q&A, I'd like to make a few announcements. Let me share my screen. First, I'd like to thank all the folks who donated to today's program. With your continued support, we can keep these events free for all. If you did not donate and are interested in doing so, you can scan the QR code to do so, and it will take you to our website. This Saturday, let's go down. September 21st is the Biodiversity Festival at Big Marsh Park. Which is one of the largest outdoor spaces. The 13 different organizations will be there presenting nature and science-based activities with the Calumet region scientists, and there'll be guided walking tours. It's a free event, so we hope you will join us this Saturday starting at 10 a.m. And that's it. Oh, and then our next travelogue will be on Tuesday, October 15th. Christina Castillo will be presenting on Jordan. So hopefully you can join us for that. Okay, and then once again, thank you to Derek. And then we can go over the questions. The first one was, can you name the gallery that you presented in your slides?
Yes, so I typed it in there if you want to copy and paste it, but it's the Fábrica de Arte Cubano, also called the FAC. So if you just Google FAC Havana, there's a website. They got a social media presence and everything. So you can follow them and see what they got going on. They do host different events at different times, so you can plan something around what's going on.
Great. And Jackson asked, what was the tipping situation? Was it expected or a high percentage?
So the places I was at, tipping, I'm trying to go by memory here. It wasn't a huge deal. It's definitely not a high percentage. We'd probably tip 10% or so, 10, 15, whatever at a restaurant. I think we tipped the scuba guide a little, but to be honest, like I do remember getting looks like why are you tipping me? Like I think the scuba guy was like, oh, thanks. Like this is nice of you. But like he was taken by surprise. However, I do think that tipping culture exists if you're going to like Veradero, which is the very touristic North Coast beach where there's a bunch of major hotels and stuff. Tipping there, I believe, is expected. But the places I went, because they weren't like major tourist sites, there just wasn't that sort of tipping culture in place that it's a big deal.
Great. And Jackson also asked, were they strict on scuba certification?
Yeah, you have to bring your card. I mean, PADI's a worldwide certification, and Cuba's, cognizant of that fact. So when we registered, the guy picked us up in that scuba mobile, and we had to go to the like office to get fitted for some gear, and they asked for our cards there. That being said, there's always like the quote unquote discover scuba situation, which is, if you don't have a certification, you can dive down to 40 feet with a private guide. And it probably costs like 10 or $15 more to do that. So you're able to dive without a certification. But I would say, yeah, they're strict in that they do ask for what's your level and proof of it.
And Judy asked, as an American, did you feel that you were treated similar to other tourists? Any negativity toward US citizens?
No, it was all normal. Everyone was super nice, super welcoming. I didn't have a negative interaction the entire time. And in fact, like, people would ask where I'm from, and I would say Los Estados Unidos, and then, they didn't react one way or the other, the way you might expect based on the history. It was just, oh, cool, whatever. And then the conversation, develops from there.
Great. Glad to hear that. And then with the old American cars being such an iconic part of Cuba, were there many foreign cars that you noticed?
Yeah, so the old American cars, especially in Havana, they're prolific. They're all over the place, but they're a minority on the road now, probably like 20%. There's tons of newer cars. They're not makes and models that we have in the US. I'm guessing they're like, Russian or Chinese cars maybe, but typically people have, like a two-door hatchback, and that was manufactured in the last 5 years. They do have plenty of, newer cars on the road.
Great. And you mentioned the cell phone information. What about the Wi-Fi situation in Cuba?
Oh yeah, Wi-Fi is an interesting one. So when you're booking an Airbnb, a lot of them will proudly boast that they have free Wi-Fi. So if that's important to you, make sure your Airbnb has it. There is also a situation, and I circumvented this because of I just opted to get that SIM card for 35 bucks. But if for some reason you didn't want that, you can buy Wi-Fi cards. Or data cards or something. And your Airbnb host can buy these for you because you have to buy them from like the little state-run store or whatever. And they allow you to access the internet temporarily from a cell tower. So there are ways around that. That just seemed like a little time consuming, so I just opted to do the SIM card. But yeah, Airbnbs have Wi-Fi, and then there's technically public Wi-Fi, but there's just a hoop to jump through to get connected to it.
Great. And one of the listeners said that she missed, did you mention what month and year you're traveling in Cuba?
Yeah, I went in July 2023, so about 14 months ago.
Okay. And one more question on the visa. They missed it. Where did you get your visa?
So I got my visa in advance. To be honest, I don't remember the website, but if you Google Cuban visa advance, you'll find it. Just go through the official channels. I think it's even on like the US State Department website. There's a link to it. And you just pay the fee and they mail it to you overnight or 2 day or whatever. And then that being said, I did that just to be safe, but you can also just buy your visa at the airport when you get there. I flew from O'Hare to Miami and then transferred, and in front of literally at the gate to board the flight to Havana, they set up a little temporary kiosk that says Cuban visa, and you can just buy it on the spot. And I think they take cards there even.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much again, Derek, for presenting on Cuba. Yes, and we look forward to your next travelogue in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for joining.